All right, back to nimble. So start over with introduction. So part of the dynamic duo from the Brandeis program is Dr. Jon Chilingerian, who is professor at the Heller School for Social Policy and Management. And when we took his course, one of the things I was really struck by was his work in change management. And at the time, I was trying to introduce checklists into our operating room and not succeeding. And one of the things that Jon taught us was about understanding the barriers to success and the facilitators to success. And we brought him back a couple of years ago to work through a program called Change Pro. And we ran the Change Pro exercise at the SAGE's Board of Governors. And even though I was doing it for the second time, I got barely any more right than I did the first time, but it was a little bit better. And so it's an extraordinary pleasure to welcome Jon back. He's not going to talk about change management, which is really important as we want to lead change, learning how to lead change, but he's going to talk about surgical leadership instead. So I welcome Jon Chilingerian to the stage.
Okay. Well, thank you for the kind words, Steve. I really appreciate it. And as the Pope said to a group of Jesuits recently, good afternoon. So Stuart Altman, I get a call. I'm at MIT, and Stuart Altman calls me, and he goes, you know, we want to recruit you to come to the Heller School. So I said, really, what's that? He said, well, it's Brandeis University. I said, oh, God, Brandeis, that's great. He said, yeah, come on down. Let's talk. Let's meet. So he meets me, and he looks at me, and he says, you know, he said, I'm not only impressed with your CV, but now that I've met you, see, you and I are ahead of the curve. So I said, really? He said, yeah, the world's downsizing, and you and I are already there. And I said, oh, yeah, that's why I made your short list, right? So, so here we are. So I want to just make sure that I haven't done a sound check on this, and I have a few videos. But I just want to start with a couple of thoughts. Now, the first one is that surgeons are uniquely positioned to be leaders, but are they prepared? And when I say surgeons, I also mean other physicians as well. Now, two of my colleagues, Robert Jaffe and Gareth Jones, once posed the most troubling question, kind of a look in the mirror question. Why should anybody be led by you? And that's a kind of a Shakespeare question for the king that was once a fun-loving prince, and now you're in a different position. And they argue that not everybody can be an inspirational leader, and yet authentic leaderships are found in every level of the organization. And this is something I think that every surgeon should ask themselves. To be called a clinical leader, surgeons need followers, other surgeons, residents, anesthesiologists, scrub nurses, circulating nurses, other clinical and administrative staff. And in order to do that, Derek Sivers, who we're going to watch a little short TED Talk on, once said that the follower is really an underrepresented form of an unappreciated form of leadership. So let's see if I can get this to play.
So ladies and gentlemen, at TED we talk a lot about leadership and how to make a movement. So let's watch a movement happen, start to finish, in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons from it. First, of course, you know, a leader needs the guts to stand out and be ridiculed. But what he's doing is so easy to follow. So here's his first follower with a crucial role. He's going to show everyone else how to follow. Now notice that the leader embraces him as an equal. So now it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Now there he is calling to his friends. Now if you notice that the first follower is actually an underestimated form of leadership in itself. It takes guts to stand out like that. The first follower is what transforms a lone nut into a leader. And here comes a second follower. Now it's not a lone nut, it's not two nuts, 3 is a crowd, and a crowd is news. So a movement must be public. It's important to show not just the leader, but the followers, because you find that new followers emulate the followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, and immediately after, 3 more people. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point. Now we've got a movement. So notice that as more people join in, it's less risky. So those that were sitting on the fence before now have no reason not to. They won't stand out. They won't be ridiculed, but they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. So, over the next minute, you'll see all of the those that prefer to stick with the crowd, because eventually they would be ridiculed for not joining in. And that's how you make a movement. But let's recap some lessons from this. So first, if you are the type, like the shirtless dancing guy, that is standing alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals. So it's clearly about the movement, not you. Okay, but we might have missed the real lesson here. The biggest lesson, if you noticed, did you catch it? Is that leadership is over-glorified. That yes, it was the shirtless guy was first, and he'll get all the credit, but it was really the first follower that transformed the lone nut into a leader. So as we're told that we should all be leaders, that would be really ineffective. If you really care about starting a movement, have the courage to follow and show others how to follow. And when you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first one to stand up and join in. And what a perfect place to do that, Ted.
Okay.
Thanks.
So my mantra, I have several mantras, but the first one is every surgeon a leader, and every leader a collaborative follower and a team player. So this talk, I'm going to try to talk a little bit about the importance of teaching leadership to surgeons. Adding leadership training and development is part of contemporary surgical education. Teaching leadership to medical students, surgical residents, fellows, and other surgeons, I think, is a challenge for medical professionalism. It's an investment that healthcare organizations would get a huge rate of return, not one-off training, but in fact the development of a cadre, a depth of leadership in the organization. Now, when I refer to leadership, I'm not talking about the CEO or the chief. I'm talking about the ability to mobilize people who want to struggle for a challenging goal in the front stage of healthcare. In other words, right where the physician, patient, and the surgical teams, are interacting and throughout the organization. And this work is really the result of over 30 years of research on this as a professor. Prior to that, I was a health commissioner for the city of Boston at Boston City Hospital. And I work with very closely with physician and non-physician executives. I've conducted observational studies. My doctoral dissertation was back a long time ago when the horses were invented. I looked at hospital chief executives with clinical backgrounds, MDs and non-MDs, and to study and see, because I believe that there was something that was missing in this industry, and we have to think about it very, very seriously. And I've done a lot of qualitative studies, as well as I've done international studies. I do a lot of work throughout the world. And I've done a lot of looks at other kinds of leaders, general managers, as well as physician leaders, as well as symphony conductors and religious leaders and general managers and so forth. And as Stuart mentioned, at Brandeis, we have a couple of interesting things. Back in 1995, we launched the first of its kind, a 4-year dual degree with Tufts School of Medicine. And my colleague Norman Stearns and I, who I'd met at MIT, developed a 4-year dual degree. So our med students, we try to take about 10% of the class, would come into med school in the first year, and by the 4th year go into their residency with not only an MD but an MBA. And we also, since 2004, have had this wonderful program that Stuart mentioned with the American College of Surgeons, the Fellows Program, and SAGES, and other medical societies. And finally, we launched a 16-month executive MBA for physicians. Dr. Talamini is one of our first graduates, so he can tell you all the good and the bad and the ugly about it. But we graduated 36 people. It's a 16-month blended learning program exclusively for physicians. And one of the things these programs have demonstrated is the ability of physicians to take leadership roles and make significant clinical and managerial improvements. And I agree that that's not enough, but I think we need to do it more and more systematically. So what I'll do is I'm going to talk a little bit about why surgeons need leadership training, which I've started to do, and also define leadership versus management. And I'll give you some examples. And I thought it'd be kind of cute. I like the metaphor of having studied symphony conductors and seeing different leadership styles. I thought we'd kind of look at them. In some ways, I think it's a nice metaphor for us, trying to get all of these 80 musicians, independent, struggling to create one sound, one voice, and we'll look at a couple of examples of this to demonstrate kind of in some way tongue-in-cheek, but leadership styles. And then I've got a couple of examples of leadership. One, a general surgeon, and another, I was on a panel with Sully Sullenberger, and I want to talk a little bit about that U.S. Air Flight 1549 to demonstrate leadership effectiveness, and if time permits, looking at the idea of adapting leadership styles. So the big question, you know, and we're all struggling with it, where's surgical practice going to be in the next 5 to 10 years? We know about uncertainty, pressure, complexity. I mean, the situations are dynamic. We've got public reporting. You know, by the way, this is a real sin, and the horse got out of the barn, because, you know, since the Flexner report, we've been talking about quality, but we never really defined it. We never really measured it very well. And now you've got 40 agencies, and you've got Leapfrog, and you've got medical societies, and everybody developing their own version of all of this. And that public reporting aspect of it, I think, is really, really difficult. I think we really need to make progress on that. We've got online patient communities, patients like me and others that are actually doing really interesting research. We've got multiple performance requirements. Surgeons have to achieve, you know, this is the sort of the big triple performance problem: achieve excellent outcomes, also offer outstanding patient experience, and efficient low-cost care. Now, nobody's able to do all three of those. You can do 2 out of 3. And people have tried, they've struggled with that. As soon as you discover that your patient experience is bad, like Cleveland did, they invested for 8 or 9 years, and they brought it right up to the very best. And then they discovered that they not only get great outcomes and great experiences, but they were the most expensive system. So how do we create that, where we create the quality, you know, in relation to low cost and differentiate? How do we do this? So again, struggling surgical groups, we all know what that's about. We know that, you know, falling reimbursements, we know ICD-10, physician burnout, crushing overhead. All of these things are real. So what do? Do you hire outside consultants? Do you restructure? Do you reduce staff? Do you retreat from insurers? Do you retreat from certain procedures? Do you partner with the hospital? And so some of this has the appearance of solving the problem. I don't believe in consultants. I believe that's the job of the leader, is to do a lucid diagnosis, and I think the clinical people have the answers, and I think that's the only way to move the system forward. I think that the instability that we've seen in the system is very, very damaging, there's no generic management solution to any of this. But the missing ingredient in every healthcare organization, I believe, is the lack of effective clinical leadership, or the inadequate depth of clinical leadership inside and throughout the organization. And so I see this as a huge need, and something that we have to take a little more seriously. Now, there are 3 reasons why I think surgeons need leadership training. The first one is that there is a new and blossoming science of medicine and management. I think the merging of the biomedical sciences and the management sciences occurring. I think that our colleague, our surgeon from Intermountain, is a good example of you know, what's going on. I think clinical research and health services research are reporting significant improvements. Intermountain has hundreds of physician-led, patient-centered clinical improvements that have reduced process variation with cabbages and others that not only improve outcomes but cost. The lowest cost care they're showing, in fact, can be the best clinical results. And that was always the question: is quality and efficiency going in opposite directions? But in fact, they're showing they can. The second is that complex medical organizations have a question: who should be leading them? And for my money and how I see it, think about Google. Who ought to run a technocratic organization like Google? And the answer is not people from Coca-Cola. Who's trained in the underlying science? You've got software engineers and programmers who run Google. And I think that complex biomedical science organizations and academic medical centers and acute hospitals and, you know, and specialty hospitals ought to be led by professionals trained in the underlying biomedical science disciplines, as well as, you know, and the medical sciences, so physicians, nurses, and other clinicians. And number 3, there's growing evidence that, and what we've learned from research and what we've learned from our programs at Brandeis, is that physician leaders can make a significant difference. And there's growing evidence that the direct involvement of physicians can improve outcomes, patient experience, and efficiency in healthcare. And that evidence, I think, is quite powerful. And we know that some of the best run organizations are multi-specialty physician-led groups that organize physician leadership, bring management science a little closer to clinical operations and medical care decision-making. Now, Virginia Mason and everybody else is kind of at what I consider to be Healthcare Management 103. Healthcare Management 104 is really when physicians take control and start looking carefully at medical care decision-making and looking at the use of clinical resources in order to achieve clinical outcomes, measuring that in much more sophisticated ways. The new science of medicine and management, it's not only about the patient flow and the physics of patient flow and understanding that, but it's also about learning from outliers. It's also about knowing how to strategically design an organization and how to take a serious look at costs. The cost accounting systems in healthcare are a huge gap, and they're archaic in many, many ways. What is leadership? What is management? I want to just say that there's a big difference. What is management? Management's about, it's a 20th century invention, and it literally means handling lots of complex things. Setting up the organization, establishing budgets, coordinating, reporting on performance. But the simplest thing is that managers basically ask people to do things that they don't really want to do. That we have to have a head count. We have to, rationalize the services, whatever euphemisms they want. We have to retreat from certain service lines. So this is what management is. So what is leadership? Leadership is the art of mobilizing others to want to struggle for those shared aspirations. So the difference between management and leadership is that we're asking people to do the same thing, but managers, are trying to get people to do things with their authority that they don't really want to do, and a lot of implementation falls flat. Leadership is getting people to want to do those things because they see the value, that the alignment of all of the stakeholders within the system, within the healthcare organization, and outside it are absolutely necessary. And for my money, this is really what leadership's about. So if you want to be a leader, the question is, can you get people to want to do these things that managers tell you to do, but you don't really want to do? So just a quick review. Two of my colleagues, Kozas and Posner, who, by the way, defined this very nice definition of leadership, did a replicated study over and over again, and they say, what are the characteristics of admired leaders? And here's the foundation. It turns out that asking 75,000 people throughout the world, North America, Australia, Europe, Asia, Africa, the four characteristics that more than 50% of 75,000 people said. So in other words, this is universal, this is about human nature. What do you admire and respect in a leader? And the answer is, number one, honesty. 89%. Forward-looking, ability to see the future. Inspiring. To get people excited. Physicians are the easiest people in my book to change because they're curious, they want to know, and they want to see the facts, and then to get them not only aware, interested, but excited about change, and that's how you can be an inspirational leader. And finally, not brilliant, but competent, just 68%. So everything else falls apart, but that's the most important thing. Now here's the dirty truth. Psychologists tell us we lie 7 times a day. So if honesty is number one in that very big list. Now, I have to tell you that for myself, not Google, but Apple is making me lie now, because every time I was putting on my cell phone on directions to get here, and it says, "Are you driving?" And I'm at a stoplight. I went, "No." And I had to do it twice, so I already lied twice today. So let me just say one other thing. I think the new imperative, I think, for us is this idea of training, and what does it mean to be a clinical leader? And leadership is one of those. The romance of leadership and the idea of heroic leaders is the past. Leadership is very, very different today than it was in the past, and I think we have to understand this. And just getting a leadership coach is not necessarily going to be good, because there's no barriers to entry. Anybody can be a leadership coach. One of the worst hospital CEOs who failed left and then set up a leadership coaching practice in another state. So, you got to be careful about these things. As I say, there's no rules, and you're not sure who you're working with. But what does it mean to be a clinical leader? Now, one of the best examples in my book is Dr. Tommy Mihaljevic, who I've been studying. I've been watching the Cleveland Clinic in Abu Dhabi as it's emerged from an idea from Mubadala saying we want brains to come here and give us the best acute care system you can imagine. And I go every year. I've been going since the mid-2000s, and I got to watch him in action, as well as interview a lot of people. And being an MD CEO requires being both a team player and a coach and taking on multiple roles: clinical leader, cardiothoracic surgeon, chief strategist, visionary, figurehead. Well, being a CEO and a physician is daunting. This is sort of what he said to me. He said, I am a thoracic surgeon, I'm the CEO. As the surgeon, I perform minimally invasive robotic heart surgery. I'm available 24/7 as the responsible physician working with the most qualified workforce. And these are very big ideas at his hospital. I can make decisions that put the patient first. I must understand our internal problems. As hospital CEO, I have morning huddles, administrative meetings, rounds, and other duties. Playing both roles enables me and other physician leaders here at Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi to understand clinical managerial policy in the world we do. So I wrote a kind of a case study on this, and I thought this was interesting. It's a great hypothesis, but it fits with my idea about this idea that managers with clinical backgrounds are going to run much, much, much better healthcare organizations. So he says, if we can borrow this, he goes on to say, if I can borrow the metaphor from the military, who ought to lead medicine? Well, it should not be the general, but the corporal. And so a hospital CEO ensconced in meetings in the C-suite with VIPs is like a general 5 miles away. They can be out of touch. So for me, it would be difficult to envision. Now, I think that's a lot to ask people, but I believe that that's the model for the future, this idea of the physician as player-coach. And I want to talk a little bit about leadership styles. So again, this player-coach analogy, I think, is really, really an interesting one for us to be thinking about. And he or she, as a player-coach, as a surgeon, a clinician, is developing and executing both the medical and the operating strategy, holding everybody accountable for patient outcomes, playing and collaborating on the surgical team, calling signals, managing tactics, making surprise plays, whatever. But thinking about that, it requires some training, and it's not intuitive. I can tell you that there are very few born leaders. Most leaders have great abilities, but all of them also have great disabilities because they're human, and that they need development, they need feedback, they need to know how they're being perceived. So what is leadership style? Leadership style is a pattern of behavior, words and actions, what you do, where you go, your attention structure, what you focus on, what comes out of your mouth. That role modeling is so powerfully important. All of those things are part of your style as perceived by others. So style is basically a pattern of behavior and what you do in a variety of situations on a day-to-day basis. And so now progress has been made in understanding leadership, because over the last 50 years, we know that the two basic ingredients of leadership are the amount of task behavior that's displayed and the amount of relational behavior that's displayed. The asking and listening leader is every bit as important. That's one leg of leadership. And the other leg, of course, is the telling and the persuading leader, and being able to explain the rationale why we're going in this direction. At the same time, to be able to have an honest ability to listen to people's point of view and to avoid getting into the content of what's going on, but in fact managing the processes. And that's where strategic thinking comes in. So task behavior refers to leaders' words and actions to guide and teach people how to do things, review roles, responsibilities, instructing people about goals. And again, it focuses your attention on getting to the goal, the results, the standards, overcoming constraints and barriers, and so forth. And so there's task behavior, very much focused on goals and that sort of thing. Now, relational behavior is really the words and actions that allow and enable you to make connections with people by asking and really listening, by reflecting, affirming what people say, expressing appreciation, listening to people's ideas and concerns, treating people fairly and with respect. So these are the two ingredients to leadership. And if we put these two elements, these two ingredients, on a horizontal and vertical axis, we get a kind of a 2x2 table with 4 quadrants. And so we've got this relational behavior and this task behavior. And each of these 4 quadrants, inside each one, is where leadership style exists. So this is leader style 1. Very high task, low relationship. Style 2, this is high relational, low task. Style 3 is low task but high on relationship. And style 4, low task, low relationship. So, so those are the 4, again, the styles, as people interact with you, and whether it's in 3 minutes or in 3 months, over time they see a pattern, and it's a perception. And perceptions are basically predictive hypotheses about what people expect to see from you based on this past behavior. So style 1. So style 1 in this first quadrant is the, I call the authoritative directive leader. And the best example of that is Carlos Muti. So he's a symphony conductor in the past, and I thought this was a kind of an interesting. Watch his style. Tell me what you see. Okay? Very much in charge, directive, authoritative, right? Now, the second style, and that goes back to this high relational, high task quadrant. Okay, and here's an example of it. So Mirga Tyler, she's a symphony conductor, and she very much communicates with the musicians by putting herself at the center. So again, she puts herself at the center, a lot of two-way communication, explaining, providing opportunity for clarification, and that's how she works in rehearsals, and that, as you see from the performance, she's right in the middle of it with them. Now, a third style, which I think is interesting, is this coaching style, or this participating leader, listening, sharing ideas, diagnosing the situation, and exploring solutions. And so here, you know, you see the leader is much more of a listening leader, much more coaching people, and again, participating in the group. And Carlos Kleiber is probably a good example of this. So watch how he gets into the whole thing and participates with them. All right, so just to have a little fun with this. Now here is the fourth style, and this is called the empowering or delegating style. Now delegation is not giving people work that you don't want to do. Delegating is when people are so competent, they're so willing and able, they can do it better than you, that you become the student, they become the teacher. Whereas Muti is much more the teacher in the instructor, you know, directly controlling things. And here's Leonard Bernstein. So now watch this. This is an actual performance. And watch his expressions. Okay, so now we let's go back to Muti. So remember, the leader in charge, directed to the goal, get the results, instructing, supervising, making it happen, right? And we can see this again, just to watch the contrast between the two. All right, so you see the difference. All right, so the point is that each of these, I just did this just to characterize style, but each of these, this sort of the Muti style and Murga and Carlos Kleiber and Bernstein, each one is in a different quadrant. And what the simple thing is this: all of you are probably good at 2 or 3 of these styles, and all you have to learn is 1 or 2 more, and learn when to adapt your style. Because the telling and persuading leader and the asking and listening leader, those are the 2 legs you have to stand on as a leader, and you have to use, to be effective, all 4 of these quadrants. And so, you should be in the OR, a lot like Bernstein was over here, except from time to time when things go wrong. So let's talk a little bit about this. So my studies of leadership, I've come to the conclusion that what is adapting leadership style all about? It's about understanding the situation that you're in and being able to use good strategic thinking, which says you're diagnosing the situation, you understand very clearly what the objectives are, and then you get to the alternatives. And I'll show you an example of this. So your job is to guide and motivate people to want to respond to those situations, and some styles are more effective than others. So when I study leaders, I spent 2 years studying hospital chief executives and looking at how they used their attention structure and their style, it revealed some very, very interesting things to me. So just as an example, you can imagine in a crisis, you need clear roles and expectations. So you're going to be very task-oriented and not very relational, not a lot of time to talk and communicate with people, but you're going to pretty much be that Muti kind of, get in the, on top of everybody. You're the teacher, they're the student. So that's that style over here. Now, organizational problem solving, you're trying to, move the organization in a new direction. You want to communicate with everybody. You want to hear their ideas and their concerns. You want them to be persuaded by the evidence that's been collected. Then you're the hub at the center. You're in the middle of all of that. Over here, if you've got interpersonal problems, people are able to do their jobs, but they're unwilling. They're not motivated. They're not committed to the new system. They're not convinced that checklists are the right way to go, as Steve was mentioning from his experience. Now your job is here. You're coaching them. You're part of the group. You're listening, and you're trying to understand how they feel, so you can decompose that to understand their perceptions and what assumptions they're making. The leader that listens down here is listening in a Socratic way to correct you, listening to refute you. The listening here is much more two-way, but the listening over here is genuine, honest listening. People that can really listen and for 40 minutes listen and not talk in that hour, and maybe only talk 10 minutes. And then again, if we look at routine procedures, you don't need a lot of leadership. Again, you become the student, they become the teacher, and that's the Bernstein. Bernstein will say, the performance is a joke. I'm just a pawn standing in front. It looks good, but it's in a rehearsal that you use all of these styles in order to get the people over here, and that's why he showed that incredible empowerment and appreciation for what they were able to do. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple of examples of adapting leadership styles, and the first one I think is an important and interesting example. I happen to be on a patient safety panel and looking at airline and patient safety with Sully Sullenberger, and this is in reference to January 15th, 2009. U.S. Air Flight 1549 departs from LaGuardia en route to North Carolina, 3:25 p.m. The co-pilot's flying, And 90 seconds into the takeoff, the Airbus A320 hit a flock of Canadian geese. So now here's the problem. There's a dramatic loss of thrust and no sideward motion. Conclusion, both engines are out. So Hot 1 is the captain, Hot 1. Hot 2 is the co-pilot, Skiles. Now, what Sullenberger said to me, in the huddle that we did before, we have to do quick teaming now because I'd never flown with them before. And the history of catastrophic airline crashes is that a first flight crew, when there's any technical problems, has a 75% chance of having a catastrophe and losing, the entire group, especially on a first flight. So we have the huddle. Not everybody does this, but I include everybody. The flight attendants, the co-pilot, baggage, mechanics, I get everybody in the huddle. I found out that Skiles knew the Airbus better than me, and the quick reference manual he would know much better than me. So you'll see in this animation, you'll hear the conversation with air traffic control. You will see the GPS. You'll see the conversation from the black box between Hot 1 and Hot 2. And at some point, they hit the birds, bang, and then captain takes authority. He says, my aircraft, takes it from the co-pilot. I said, why did you do that? He said, because he knew the Airbus better than me, and the most important thing, when you've got two engines out and you're flying over New York City, and you've got a couple of thousand feet, you've got to figure out a way to restart those engines, and that's the procedure. So we'll watch that. Okay, so again, Hot 1 is the captain. You should be able to see some of this. There's a lot going on. So took off from LaGuardia. There were 2,300 feet, and so Hot 1 flaps up.
70. Every day.
And that's air traffic control with the captain.
Here, Johnny 2760, 5,000, turning your right to 150.
Johnny 2760, climb maintain 10,000.
10,000, Johnny 2760.
So that's a quick reference.
15.9, turn left lane 270.
This is Cactus 1539. Hit birds, so you lost thrust on both engines, returning back towards LaGuardia.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading up 220.
220.
Tower, stop your departures, got emergency returning. It's 1529. He bird strike. He lost all engine. He lost the thrust in the engines. He's returning immediately.
Cactus 1529. Which engines?
He lost thrust in both engines. He said.
Got it.
Cactus 1529. We can get it for you. Do you want to try to land 1013?
We're unable. We may end up in the Hudson.
Johnny 2760. Turn left 070.
I'm just Johnny 2760.
So the left one's coming back. Engine's back, you fly back to the airport. It's much safer.
Hi, Cactus 15.9. It's going to be left traffic to runway 31.
Unable.
Okay, what do you need to land? Cactus 15.9. Runway 4 is available if you want to make left traffic to runway 4.
I'm not sure we make any runway. What's over to our right? Anything in New Jersey, maybe Teterboro?
Okay, yeah, off your right side is Teterboro Airport. Do you want to try to go to Teterboro?
Yes.
Teterboro, Empire, actually LaGuardia departure guy, emergency inbound.
Hey, guys.
Cactus 1529 over the George Washington Bridge, wants to go to the airport right now.
Wants to go to our airport. Check. Does he need assistance?
Yes, it was a bird strike. Can I get him in for runway 1?
Runway 1, that's good.
Cactus 1529, turn right 280, you can land runway 1 at Teterboro.
We can't do it.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
I'm sorry, say again, Cactus? All right. Kelly 2760, contact New York 12618.
2680, Joey 2760.
Cactus 15.9, radar contact is lost. You also got Newark Airport up at 2 o'clock in about 7 miles. Eagle 5 4718, turn left bank 210.
210, 4718. I don't know, I think he said he was going in the Hudson.
Cactus 1529, east on. Cactus 1529, if you can, you got runway 29 available at Newark, will be 2 o'clock in 7 miles. Eagle 5 4718, climb maintain 12000.
Okay, 1000 and even 5 at Collegiate.
Eagle 5 4718, I'm sorry, I missed that. Say again?
And we're up to 12,000 to Indian Head.
Okay, thank you. Eagle 5 4718, turn left 220.
220, 4718.
Okay, so I think there's a lot of interesting things for me that I see. And this is the difference between what Danny Kahneman calls fast thinking and slow thinking. This is slow thinking. And that slow thinking means that if you've got more than, than a minute, that you can do good strategic thinking, diagnosing the situation moment by moment by moment. There's a clear role for the leader. Technology, emergency checklists help. And he was one of the pioneers to start the movement of checklists back in the 90s for pilots, and it had a huge effect on the airline industry in improving their quality and safety. There are moment-by-moment adjustments, sourcing external knowledge, checking facts, processing information, activating people, adapting, and so forth. So as we look at this, searching for a single cause. By the way, luck had a huge a part in this, because if it was 9 o'clock at night, it would have been, all bets are off. Who knows what would have happened? But this decision-making unit was strategically designed so the people and the structures supported the tasks at hand. Execution has to be flawless. Now, what Sullenberger said to me was coordination was amazingly good. We did quick teaming, even though the event was severe. The team has to be activated very, very fast. And it means open lines of communication. Everybody's got to be on the same page. He said, Skiles, the co-pilot, and I were on the same page. We knew our roles. He had the more important role of trying to restart the engines. That's a much more important role. And then we circle back. They made sure that the flight attendants were, managing the panic that was going on. And Sullenberger said, I heard them. They were, it was very clear. Heads down, stay down, heads down. They calmed everybody down. And we lost an engine, and we were circling back. Everything was quite orderly. The air traffic controllers, Coast Guard, helicopters, boats, divers, 140 New York City Fire and Police show up in the scene. And again, luckily it was daytime. So again, and he said this over and over again, although I don't know how he feels about it now, but he said, I'm no hero. He said, without a team, you can't do this. And that was the big lesson. So that even in a crisis, you can't say that there's no time to call a meeting. You have to be able to activate the team. So, and I think, again, the teamwork on all levels, I think, was incredible in this and taught us a lesson. So, again, if we think about this, these two ingredients, this task and relational behavior, and you look at adapting your styles, even in that short period of time, hit birds, lost thrust in both engines. Which engines? Both engines. My aircraft, your aircraft, the call and respond between hot 1, hot 2. Anything in Teterboro. So again, very relational, ask, listen, what's the information? No relight after 30 seconds, so the engines are idle. So they've got to make quick decisions. We're going in the Hudson, very task-oriented. And then at the end, did you notice this? Any ideas? Any ideas? Are the flaps right? Are we in the right angle? Because it has to be a near-perfect landing. So you see that you're continually adapting your style all the time, drawing on this very task-oriented quadrant, processing information back and forth, asking and listening, and here, again, to see if someone else knows more than you. So what is leadership? It's a kind of strategic thinking that guides and motivates people to want to respond to these challenging situations. But it requires a leader who's not making decisions and coming to the solution, but starts with diagnosing. And this is one of the reasons why I believe physicians are best positioned to do this kind of strategic thinking as leaders. Now, what we know is that leaders have the greatest effect on team functioning before you get into this emergency. So while you're in flight, that's not the time to be building the team. And so those huddles and how you do that and training people how to do those much better. And the new science around quick teaming, which some emergency rooms know quite well, some surgical teams know quite well, is extremely important. Now, they have studies that have been done of excellent airline captains who have the best safety records and who are observed by what they call check airmen. And so what they do is they spend much more time building the team when the group first forms than the weaker leaders. The other thing that the weaker leaders do is they draw a red circle around the cockpit, so it's only the navigator and the co-pilot, and they exclude the flight attendants and others. So what do we learn about this in terms of studying effective airline captains? Number one, they never talk about routine stuff. Excellent captains are listeners. They ask and listen. And that discipline of listening is so powerful. It's not having a speech and reading a canned presentation. So set number two, again, you include everybody, being more inclusive. You think about it. Who's on the team? How do you define the team? What the service science tells us is that patient satisfaction has a lot to do with the very last person encountered in a service. And so who is that? It could be the receptionist. It could be the parking lot attendant. So how we define and think about the boundaries of the team is extremely important. Number three, expectations. What are the ground rules? What are the values? What are the expected behaviors? And again, focusing on safety, focusing on effective communication. Now, what Sullenberger said was that when he does one of these huddles, he said to me, I make it clear that I need to talk to everybody, and I will listen to you. I expect you to speak up. And he always says, I want to get back tonight to my family, as all of you do, if anyone has anything to tell us about safety at any point. So he said, multiple times mechanics have said, I don't think it's safe to fly. He said, we didn't. And then lo and behold, he said, it turned out it wasn't a problem. And I went and thanked them and said, I always want you to do that. I'm not going to, and so only leaders can give people permission to be able to do that. And then finally, they adapt their style. So what we know from these studies of even in the airlines is that to go from task behavior to relational behavior, shifting from holding people accountable to asking for ideas, and to being able to do that, that's an incredible ability to be able to work with people, and that's what these excellent leaders do. Now, I'll give you one more example, and then I'll wrap up and say a few things, and I think Steve said there'll be some Q&A maybe afterwards. So this is one that I like very much because it's about a surgeon, and the surgeon is in the forward surgical unit. His name is Captain O. And he received information that a 23-year-old male was being air evacuated to a forward surgical unit, to his unit. And the patient was described as hypotensive, having metallic fragments in the abdomen. And the truth of the matter was that this patient was in a firefight in Afghanistan, and he had live ordnance in him. And that the medic wrapped it up, and they all agreed when the helicopter came that they were going to bring him back to the surgical unit in violation of the military code, which says this is an expectant patient. You leave them in the battlefield if they've got live ordnance in them. That was the rule. So the rocket entered the left iliac and traversed the abdominal cavity, but Captain O was told metallic fragments, and the patient was hypotensive. So, so this, I think, is another good example of the surgeon as a leader, and what do you do in that situation when you discover, when you bring this patient into the OR, that it's not a fragment, it's live ordnance.
On March 16, 2006,
so this is the patient.
We were on a mounted patrol in Afghanistan, and we were coming around a bend, and we were ambushed from the left. They began to shoot small arms fire and then heavy arms fire with RPGs. One RPG went over the head of our truck, and I was struck with the RPG that went into my abdomen. It came through the top of my Humvee, and it pierced my pelvic bone, my pelvic wing, and came through and got enlarged in my right thigh, and it got stuck there. I just kept asking when is the chopper coming, because I thought I'd never get back to my family. I thought I was just gonna die right there. I felt the cool breeze of the chopper just coming in, and I could see that yellow smoke. And I just thought about my wife and my girls growing up without me, and some of those quiet moments I had, like when I had my eyes closed on the plane. I just thought I was gonna die. I just thought they weren't gonna be able to save me, that I was never gonna be able to. You know, if I did survive, I wasn't gonna be able to function. You know, but I felt that peace in one moment, that if I did die, that I died for the right cause and I did the right thing. But you want to fight and you want to live, and your inner feeling is to fight. You know, you can go on, you can do this. We touched down in OE, and I can remember them just rushing like to get me out, just rushing, and they sat me on the table, and they started cutting all my clothes off, and I can remember just Captain O looking at me like, he's got a live ordnance in him, everybody get out.
After they had removed all his clothing, I could clearly see this rod sticking out of his hip, so I was actually looking at it, and I had never seen an RPG before, but I realized that this looked like some kind of munition because it had fins on it. So it's kind of hard to imagine any other rod that would have fins on it sticking out of somebody's hip. The guideline is you're not supposed to bring them in the aid station. You actually leave them outside and you treat them as what we call an expectant patient. So you treat him like he's going to blow up. So which means that you put him outside the aid station, you take precautions to keep him away from the facility, but essentially you treat him like an expectant patient, like he's not going to survive. You know, I was scared shitless, basically. I'd never been so scared in my whole life. And you look at the guy and then you think, there's no way I'm going to let this guy die. It just can't happen. It can't happen. EOD came in, we're trying to figure out what this bomb was, and EOD was saying that it could go off at any second. This thought went through my head that these were the last people I was ever going to see, potentially. I said, if this thing goes off, I just want you all to know it's been great working with you. And that was it. That was it.
You all have an RPG inside, a possible RPG inside the soldier. Worst case scenario, we could bring the roof down on top of us, but you would already be dead before the roof hit the ground. We took an x-ray of him to see what we had inside him, and we found out that we had was just from this portion of, this is an RPG here, just from this portion back and the tail fins, which is another additional foot to 6 inches, was impaled inside him from above his left hip into his right thigh. Now we worried about the fact that there was a detonator, and which still had an explosive charge to it, but not as great, that could wound the surgeons, kill the patient, and wound ourselves while we're working.
It was imperative to get this thing out as quick as possible in order to complete the operation and save his life. At that point, I don't think anybody thought about the danger to themselves. They just thought about getting this thing out as fast as possible.
It was a feeling of tension, of course, but of amazement at the same time that we were able to be involved in doing something like this, of removing an RPG from a person that was still alive. Our whole thought the entire time was how to keep Cheney Moss alive. The moment until I had that RPG outside of Cheney Moss, it was complete silence. I was inside myself. I was knowing what I was doing and had no distractions until the moment that that RPG was out of my hands. Then that's when the world came back into play, and it was like just a vacuum was released, and all the noise, all the commotion, and I just sat down and I started shaking. It was complete release, just complete amazement, release at the same time, and oh my God, we just finished something that saved a kid's life.
I think I did it because I knew that he had a chance to make it, but the basic reason was because Channing Moss was looking at me and talking and breathing, and that's why I did it. for me to do it once, you know, when he shows up, I don't think that's a very heroic thing. For these guys to go outside the wire and put themselves at risk and lives at risk every day, that's heroic.
From my chain of command to the people that I was with on the ground when I got hurt, to the pilot that actually took the initiative to fly me out when I got the OE to the 4 surgical team, and all those people that were volunteers and volunteered to do what they had to do, and they could have died at any time. They could have blew up, and they could be missing arms, legs right now, because I still had a live ordinance in me. They took the initiative. It's speechless. Thank God for them people being in the position that they were in at the time. Thank them. I mean, I owe them my life. I owe them my life.
Okay, so I think that's a bit of an emotional, but it's at the same time a very, very important example of leadership. And I think, you know, they considered, because of the violation of the rule, court-martialing Captain O, and they didn't. And instead, you know, they promoted him as based on calling him a captain now. So he did some really, really interesting things. The first thing he did was, as soon as he realized there was possibly live ordnance and that there were fins, he evacuated the facility. So again, moment by moment, strategic thinking, diagnosing the situation. He then told the medics and the other orthopedic surgeon that was with him, he said, look, you guys understand what's going on here. I want you to know you should leave. And nobody did. They said, Captain, Dr. O, if you're staying, we're staying. And so they had that choice. He then called in the explosive ordnance team, and the sergeant said, we radiographed to determine the status of the suspected unexploded ordnance. And again, worst case, everybody dies. And we've got a, sorry. But that's not the case. So, well, let's radiograph it. They figured out what was going on. They then made the decision, since it was evacuated, to bring him into the operating room. And again, the captain said to everybody, you know, you understand what's going on. It's okay to leave. Nobody did. So again, this to me illustrates this, this very, very powerful idea that strategic thinking is really about these two processes, that diagnosing the situation is the first and foremost important thing to do in the rational process. At the same time, the relational process has to be managed. And that's what leadership is about. It's about the most powerful place to intervene as a leader is always process. It's not getting into the content. Let's do this, let's do that. We ought to buy this facility. Let's merge with another group. Let's join this ACO. It's not to get into the content, but it's making sure that people are as rational as possible, that you separate the facts from the assumptions, that you're listening to other people's ideas, people are participating equally, you're reading, and you're relying on the collective intelligence of the group. And that's the key process. And then leadership is always this kind of strategic thinking, guiding and motivating people to want to respond. So I'm gonna end here. I'm gonna just say a couple of things about what it means to be a clinical leader. If surgeons are prepared to lead, they should always be engaging the best people. And again, diagnosing the evolving situation, the changes in the rules, the competition, surgical improvements. Through their networks, they should be able to ensure a very lucid diagnosis of the future and the regulatory conditions and technological innovations, changes in population health, reimbursement, taking charge of those things. So training physicians to lead requires them to do something that they already do quite well, which is understand how to diagnose, but diagnosing a situation. What I find when I've observed some clinical leaders is they think that MD means make decisions when you're an administrator. So that's not what it's about. It's about getting the group to understand the situation we're in, to take the current situation to turn it into a better future situation for patients, for the institution, for the department, and so forth. People are hardwired by human nature to start with strategy and alternatives. And that's the wrong place to start. So the job of the leader is to go against the currents of human nature and to start with diagnosing the problem, giving people permission to challenge and make the assumptions explicit, because the primary reason for strategic failure are unchallenged assumptions, and those assumptions have to be made explicit. Again, assumptions are unconscious and they're carried in the head. They should be hypotheses that are tested against the evidence. The job of the leader is to manage the rational decision-making process, to avoid premature discussion, and when people advocate too quickly for one alternative, to make sure that you pull people back and say, you know, maybe we need to think about this a little bit more. A clinical leader's first obligation is to help the team to separate the facts from the assumptions. Again, only the leader can give people permission to do that and to learn from small mistakes and small errors. So leadership training requires activity in the presence of knowledge. You saw that. That's exactly what you see going on here. That this taking action in the middle of a situation, it requires an application of knowledge, experience, skills, and a willingness to commit, and to understand the importance of that role as a leader, and to believe in the capability of the team, or to develop the team to become so capable, like Bernstein, for the performance that he was able to just love what they were doing. So it requires a relentless willingness to learn from mistakes, to take full responsibility for outcomes, to communicate why the mission and goals are important, and to make it meaningful for everyone. Thank you. Okay, good.
Wow, permission to breathe. That's about as much emotional and gut-wrenching a talk I've seen, from watching that plane go by to U.S. soldier and their whole team life in jeopardy. So, Jon, thank you for